When your children don't respect you, do this. Instead, 6 powerful ways to regain respect. Senior. As 78-year-old Walter looked out the window of his small cabin in Vermont, he couldn't help but sigh. The view was as peaceful as it had been for years. The snow-covered porch, the pine trees in the yard were silent, and his familiar rocking chair was still there. But his heart was no longer at peace. Walter had been a man respected by his family. He was a former civil engineer who had built not only strong bridges, but also a united family, a place where his wife and children could always find peace. But then his wife died. The children grew up, got married, moved away, and the distance was not just geographical, but emotional. Last week, at Thanksgiving dinner, when Walter gently commented on his grandchild's excessive use of his phone during the meal, his daughter, Rachel, didn't even look up. She just said coldly, "Dad, things are different now. Don't try to be bossy anymore." Everyone at the table fell silent. Walter swallowed, silent, as if he had done something wrong. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time he felt like a stranger in his own family. And then that night, in the silence of the empty house, Walter began to wonder, when did I lose my children's respect? And how can I get it back without arguing, without blaming? If you're watching this video, you may be asking the same questions Walter is asking. You may have felt left out, without a voice in the home you've worked so hard to build. But I want you to know this: respect is not lost forever, and you're not alone. In today's video, we'll explore 6 profound, subtle, yet powerful ways you can regain your child's respect, no matter what stage of life you're in. These aren't dogmatic tips, but strategies drawn from real-life stories like Walter's and hundreds of other parents across America. Stay until the end of the video, because the 6th way, the final way, is not just a solution, but a turning point that can change the way your child sees you forever. And if you find this content touching, please give it a like to support the channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories. Comment below if you've experienced something similar to Walter, or share this video with a friend who is in a similar situation. Who knows, you might just be the one to spark a big change in their family. The next morning, Walter woke earlier than usual. He brewed a pot of strong coffee, then quietly went out onto the front porch. The misty light covered the distant woods. The rocking chair creaked under his weight, not just his body, but his years and his unanswered thoughts. He recalled something his wife Eleanor once said: "Never let people define you by how well you serve them. Your worth is not in how much you give, but in how well you stand when you are forgotten." For years after his wife died, Walter tried to fill the void by doing everything for his children. He cleaned Rachel's house when she needed it, fixed Kevin's porch every fall, drove 3 hours to Boston just to babysit his grandchildren while they went on vacation. He never said no. Even when he was tired, he smiled, tried to look healthy. Because deep down, he believed that, as long as he gave enough, sacrificed enough, his children would always appreciate him, always need him. But then one day, he began to realize, the more he tried to please, the more he was looked down upon. The last time he had gone to Kevin's house to help him fix a garage door he thought was broken, Kevin had said something that had left him speechless. "Dad, we don't need you to worry about this anymore. Just relax, okay?" The smile on Walter's face couldn't hide the pain in his heart, not because of the garage door, but because of his son's eyes. The eyes of someone who found him annoying, not a devoted father. That afternoon, Walter wrote a short note in an old leather notebook he always kept with him. "From now on, I will no longer try to be needed. I will begin to live as if my value does not require approval." It was the day Walter first said no to Rachel when she called him unannounced to babysit. "I'm sorry, I have a golf date with a friend," he said, his heart calm even though his hands were shaking. Rachel was silent for a moment, then hesitantly said, "Oh, that's good. Dad, go out and play to relax." Although the response wasn't exactly grateful, what surprised Walter was that the next time, Rachel called a week in advance to ask her father to make arrangements, without arguing, without lecturing, just by putting his own values first. Walter began to sense something very different from his children, a slight wariness, a caution he had not seen in a long time. And that was the first seed of respect. A week had passed since Walter had learned to say no for the first time in his life. The weather had gotten colder, and snow was covering the ground. He no longer went out into the city every day, but spent his time in his small library, which contained old bookshelves, a wedding photo of him and Eleanor, and a vintage radio he had kept since the 1970s. That day, Walter flipped open an old letter from Eleanor. Her familiar round handwriting was still clear. "I know that one day the children will grow up and forget who we were before we were parents. When that happens, don't be angry. Live so that they will be curious to remember." Walter folded the letter, speechless. For a long time, he had tried everything to make his children remember him, but he realized people cannot remember what they no longer respect. If he was only present as someone who was always on call, then what else would he be than an appendix in his children's lives? The change began to become more apparent when Kevin, the youngest son, arrived unannounced for his first visit. He knocked on the door, carrying a box of hot sandwiches from Walter's favorite bakery. "You still like this blue cheese, right?" Kevin laughed. Walter invited his son in, saying nothing about the bread, but his eyes softened. All afternoon, father and son sat by the fireplace, not saying much. But that silence was rare. No arguing, no criticism, no trying to please, just two equal people existing in each other's space. Kevin suddenly blurted out, "Dad, you seem different these days." "Kishta." Walter raised his eyebrows. "Is it good or bad?" I don't know," Kevin hesitated, "but I think I should visit you more often." Not because Walter did anything for him, but because he didn't do anything anymore. No strings attached, no expectations, no demands, just himself. And that made him respect him. That winter in Vermont lasted longer than usual. The snow covered not only the porch, but also Walter's old memories. Memories that he was now beginning to dig up, revisit, and redefine. Walter began to change little by little. No fanfare, no announcements. Just living the way he had dreamed of, but never allowed himself to live. He joined a small book club at the town library. At first he just sat in, but by the third time he spoke the longest, about a war novel he had read as a young man. The people around him, mostly widows and bachelors, were silent. Someone exclaimed, "Walter, you have the gift of storytelling like a stage actor." And for the first time in years, Walter found himself amused. One Friday afternoon, as Walter was watering new potted plants on the porch, Judith, a widowed neighbor who had recently moved in 2 doors down, walked by. She stopped to look and said something that made him laugh. "I thought only women had orchids." "I used to think so," Walter replied, "until they taught me to be more patient than my late wife." From that day on, they began seeing each other every week. Sometimes for a walk around the lake, sometimes for coffee in the backyard. No one called it a date, but everyone knew something was brewing. His daughter, Rachel, came over one weekend. She was surprised to find her father painting the fence. With one hand he was painting, while the other was blasting jazz music from a Bluetooth speaker. "What are you doing, Dad?" she asked, half mocking and half curious. Walter didn't look up. "I'm cleaning up my life, making it neat and clean, for something new." Rachel was silent. For once she didn't say anything in response. Instead, she took a step back, looking at her father from a distance, like looking at a man she thought she knew well, but never really knew. Life doesn't need much applause, but it needs a full, self-respecting and profound presence from within. Since Walter stopped trying to please his children, a strange thing has happened. They've started calling more often, asking him for advice on home improvements, sending pictures of their grandchildren on special occasions, not because they need his help, but because they now want him to be a part of their lives, not as a servant, but as a person with his own values. That afternoon, a cold rain fell in Vermont. Walter was cleaning out his garage, what he called his memory workshop. There were mementos from his engineering days, old blueprints, worn hard hats, a model of the suspension bridge he had built for a project in Connecticut. The sound of a car stopping in front of the gate made him turn around. It was Kevin. "Can I come in, Dad?" Kevin asked without getting out of the car. Walter wiped his hands on a greasy towel and nodded. They went into the living room, which still smelled of pine, with leather chairs slightly cracked with age and a family photograph hanging askew. Kevin sat down, not removing his jacket. "Dad," he began, "we've noticed you've been distant, not taking the initiative anymore. Are you mad at us?" Walter sat still, looking at the son he had once carried and taken to school on days when the snow was knee-deep. "It's not that I'm angry," he said slowly. "I just don't want to be the one to try first anymore." Kevin frowned. "What do you mean?" "For 40 years," Walter continued, "I put you first. Every decision, every priority, every sacrifice. I used to think that was the right thing to do. But then I realized respect doesn't come from unconditional sacrifice. It comes from how one loves oneself." Kevin was silent. Walter stood up and walked to the window. The rain was still falling. "Kevin, I don't need you to apologize. I just need you to understand I will still love you, but I will no longer live my life around you. And if that makes you feel distant, then maybe we weren't really close in the first place." Kevin sighed. He stood up and turned to leave, but when he reached the door, he stopped. "It takes time," he said, not turning around. "But I understand what you're trying to do, and I think I need to learn that too." The door closed softly. No banging, no anger, just one man leaving, and another staying behind, having just established the first boundary of his life. Walter didn't mention it to Judith the next day, though she stopped by with a hot apple pie. But she seemed to sense something in his eyes, a look of relief, deeper and farther than the pines in the yard. "Are you okay?" she asked. Walter chuckled. "I just cleaned up something old that I thought would never be tidy again." Judith smiled, but did not ask any more. She simply placed her hand on his, a touch that was just enough, not imposing, and for the first time Walter felt that he did not feel empty when he was with someone, not because he needed them, but because he wanted them. In the last days of winter, Walter's house was filled with the scent of licorice and gingerbread, which Grandma Judith made every Christmas. They were no longer as awkward as they had been in the early weeks. They tended plants, read books, listened to classical music, and sometimes just sat in silence. This silence, to Walter, was not empty. It was a peace he had thought he would never have again after Eleanor. One Sunday morning, the phone rang. It was Rachel. Her voice was urgent. "Dad, I know this is sudden, but I need you to watch Sam tonight. We have a company party coming up." Walter looked out the window. Today was his first date with Judith, at a small concert at the local church. He had been preparing all week, picking out seats, buying tickets, and even getting ready the black suit he hadn't worn in a long time. Part of him still had that familiar instinct, to put everything aside for his child. But this time, he breathed slowly, and spoke in a voice that wasn't angry, not sad, just the voice of someone who had finally learned to prioritize himself. "I'd love to help, Rachel, but I have plans tonight. Another time. I'm sure you'll manage." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Rachel forced a smile. "Well, have fun, Dad. Wear the suit I gave you?" Walter smiled. "That's right. Dad still has it, never gave it up." The call ended, and for the first time in years he felt no remorse, no guilt, just one thing. peace. That concert, Judith saw Walter differently. No longer the old man bent over looking after his grandson, but a gentleman, in the truest sense, with eyes shining in the church light, his shoulders shaking with emotion when the violin played. When the show ended, Judith took Walter's hand and whispered, "You should let your children see you like this. A Walter that people respect, not out of obligation, but because he is who he is." Walter just smiled. But in his heart, everything had changed. This year, for the first time since his wife died, Walter did not invite his children home. He did not call to remind them. He did not ask where they were spending Christmas. He just prepared a simple dinner with Judith, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and red wine. But around 5 p.m., the sound of cars stopped in front of the gate. First Kevin, with his wife and 2 kids, then Rachel, with homemade pies in tow. They didn't say much. They just showed up, naturally, without expecting anything, without making demands. Rachel walked in and looked around the house. The lights were hung better than ever. The fireplace was glowing red, and Judith was setting out the cutlery. She smiled as if she had just realized something. "Dad, it's really warm in our house today." Walter nodded. He didn't need to be lectured. He didn't need to be taught. He didn't need to be reminded of the past, because he understood respect didn't come from how much you sacrificed, but from how much you lived for yourself. And that was the turning point. His children, for the first time in many years, saw him not as a family helper, but as a whole person, with a life, with feelings, with principles, and, most importantly, with values far beyond the role of a father. Christmas dinner was spent in soft yellow light, the crackling of candles on the table, and a strange peace that Walter had not felt in years. No one mentioned the old conflicts. No one asked why there were no invitations this year. No one asked Walter to cook and prepare everything as before. Everyone had a hand, and most importantly, everyone looked at him differently, no longer a default, but silent respect. As everyone moved on to dessert, Sam, the 8-year-old grandson, pulled Mr. Wichemster, Walter's hand, and whispered, "Grandpa, I have to write an essay for school tomorrow. Who is the person you admire the most?" "I want to write about you. Do you mind?" Walter was stunned for a moment. He just looked at his granddaughter. Her eyes were as clear as Eleanor's, and nodded. He was very happy. "But I wrote it honestly. I wrote it because I wanted to, not because I felt sorry for him." Sam laughed and hugged him tightly. In that hug, Walter felt like someone had touched a distant memory, where he had been a son, a husband, a father, and now he was himself. When everyone left, Judith stayed behind to help clean up, but Walter told her to sit and let him do the dishes. Standing alone in the small kitchen, his hands trembled slightly from the cold water, but his heart felt strangely warm. On the table, he found the paper Sam had left behind. The first half of his essay was unfinished. "I admire Mr. Walter because he is a person who does not need anyone's respect to live a valuable life. He does not scold, does not get upset. He just quietly does everything well, and everyone around him wants to become a better person." Walter folded the paper. For the first time in years, he cried, not from hurt, but from being seen. If you're still watching until the end, maybe somewhere inside you has a story like Walter's. Maybe you felt forgotten, hurt when your children don't listen, and wondered, where did I go wrong? But the answer, as Walter discovered, lies not in the past. It's about how you start living for yourself, little by little, not to impress, not to be pitied, but to become a person worthy of respect, whether anyone is looking or not. Trust me, when you dare to set boundaries, dare to live your life to the fullest, your children will not leave. They will come back, not out of obligation, but because they want to learn how to live like you. If you're still watching until the very end, I believe somewhere in Walter's story, you see yourself. Maybe you are a father, a mother, a grandfather, a grandmother, who once silently carried the whole family, who was respected, but then one day, everything seemed to disappear in silence. But as Walter showed us, true respect never comes from the fear of losing, but from the way you live each day fully for yourself. And if you start today, just one small change, one small boundary, one small step back to self-love, you will see something magical happen. People will step forward not because you called, but because they realize you are worth being around. If you found something in this story that resonated with you, please leave a comment below. Tell me, and this community, your story. We are not alone, and sometimes just a little sharing can save someone's heart out there. And if you know someone, a loved one, a friend who is lost, hurting, send this video to them. Maybe you will be the one to revive the self-esteem of someone who once felt forgotten. Hit like if you find this a worthwhile journey, and subscribe today so you don't miss any real-life stories or important instructions in the next videos, things that can change the way you live after 60. Tomorrow, we will explore a completely different but equally important topic: 7 extremely dangerous fruits that elderly people absolutely should not eat. Health consequences revealed. A video that anyone over 60 years old should watch before choosing food for themselves or their loved ones. Stay tuned and share the channel with your friends and family so no one misses out on something that